ever looked at a macrame pattern and thought, this pattern calls for 4mm cord, but all I have is 5mm cord. I wonder if that's close enough. Or have you ever been happily working on a macrame pattern following a tutorial and you end up running out of cord halfway through and you're like, what happened? Those two things are both one of the most common questions I get asked and one of the most common issues that people ask me about when they're working on my patterns or any macrame pattern in general. And today we're going to clear it up once and for all. Cord size does matter. But don't worry, in this video I'm going to explain exactly what happens when you do use a different size cord than a pattern calls for, how to adjust the lengths if you want to use a different size cord than it calls for, and a few other tips that will save you time, frustration, and cord. So let's dive in. Cord size matters. Alright, so one of the biggest questions I get asked, and I get asked this a lot, is your pattern calls for, let's just say, 4mm cord. I have 5mm cord on hand. I don't want to go buy more cord. Can I use this cord for this pattern? Is it going to make a big difference? And the answer is yes, it will make a big difference. But that doesn't mean you can't use it. That doesn't mean it's totally a no-no. It just means you're going to have to make some adjustments to your cord lengths before you proceed. Now, this is especially important if you're going up a size of cord. If you're going down a size, you're not going to run out of cord, but what you'll end up having is you'll have a lot of excess cord, or maybe not a lot, but you'll have more than the pattern intended for you to have. Here are the main rules to remember. If you go up a cord size, so let's say the pattern calls for 3mm cord and you want to use 4mm cord, you need to make your cords longer than the pattern says, because larger cord uses more cord for the same amount of knots. Now, if you're going the other way, and say if it calls for 5mm cord and you want to use 4mm cord, then you would want to make your cords a little bit shorter, and that is just to prevent waste. Now you could just go ahead and stick with the lengths mentioned, listed in the pattern. You're just gonna have a little extra waist cord, and that's up to you if you're fine with that. You can always use it for other projects. What is happening out here? You can always use that scrap cord for other projects, things like macrame leaves or feathers or earrings or whatever, or add it for fringe to other things. But you will have excess cord left over that wasn't intended whenever the person making the pattern wrote the pattern. So there is a little bit of math involved in figuring out how much longer or shorter you need to make the cords based on if you're using a bigger or smaller cord. And I actually have a blog post written on my website, and I'm linking it down in the description, where I kind of go over all of that, and I have a little chart that shows the percentage or the amount that you need to increase or decrease the cord length to account for your different cord size. For instance, if you were following a pattern and it said you needed to use 3mm cord and you wanted to use 4mm cord, you would need to increase the cord lengths by 33%. If you hear that and you're like, what? I need like a simpler option to figure out how long or short the cords need to be. I actually made an automatic calculator inside Google Sheets that you can use to just plug in your cord size, the cord size the pattern calls for, and then your cord lengths, and it will tell you the actual length that they need to be based on these calculations in this chart that I have on this blog post. So if you want to go the easy route, I have that in my shop, and I will link that down below too. It is super, super handy. I use it all the time. I never actually go do the math anymore because I have this calculator and it just does it for me. I had to do it once, and now I don't have to do it anymore. And you don't have to do it at all because I did it all for you and put it in a calculator. So if you want to check that out, be sure to check out the link in the description. That thing is a lifesaver if you do a lot of macrame and you don't want to do a lot of math. So while we're on the topic of how cord size affects the lengths of your cord, let's talk about how to measure your actual cord size. So sometimes you'll buy a cord and it says it's one size, but it's actually not. And I don't know what happens here, if something gets lost in translation or if it's just some places just aren't as particular as others, but I have seen a lot of people contact me and say, I'm using the cord that it said to use in your pattern. You said to use 4mm cord, that's what I have. And they'll send me, but I'll be like, okay, send me a picture. And they'll send me a picture and it's like way thicker than 4mm, like there's no way. And so what I always tell them is, okay, now you need to grab a measuring device with millimeters on it and measure the width, the across size of that cord. And that is your actual true size in millimeters. It's how they measure it. When you see 4mm cord, that means that they took a measuring device, they held it up to it, and they counted how many millimeters go across there. And that is it. And sometimes you'll find that the cord that you have, it's not what it says it is. It seems to always be thicker. It always seems to be the case with the people that have contacted me, and I'm not sure where they're getting their cord from, but it just depends. It does vary depending on where you buy it from. Usually it's not that extreme, but it can be. Once you've been doing macrame for a while, you kind of can get a feel. You can kind of say, okay, that looks a little thicker than 4mm. I'm going to test it and see, or whatever. And but when you're new and you're first starting out, it's a really good idea to just give it a quick measure before you get started, just to make sure, because that'll save you a lot of headaches later on. Another thing you want to keep in mind is you want to measure it when it's unrolled from the spool. So you just take a little bit of the cord, unroll it, and then measure that, because when it's really tightly wound around the spool, it stretches the cord out and makes it look thinner than it actually is. And then once you go to use it, it's going to loosen up because, it's not wrapped up on that spool anymore. And that's the true size of what the cord is. So that's an important little thing you want to remember. It can really make a difference. There can be a whole size difference of the cord based on it being unrolled or rolled. One thing you can keep in mind, if you're buying the cord for the pattern and you don't have it already and you know you're going to go ahead and buy it for the pattern, like on my patterns, I usually will list in the description or in the blog post or the pattern, wherever it is, I'll list the actual cord that I used or the cord that I recommend, and I'll have a link to it. If you buy from there, there's a very good chance it's going to be the right thing, because I only buy my cord mainly from two shops. Gansett and Neuroma Studio, although I do buy from some other ones. Those aren't, the only good ones, but those two are good, and they are true to their size. Whenever you buy a cord from there, the size should be accurate. It always has been for me, but there are some other great places to buy too, and you can even buy from Amazon and stuff. You don't have to buy from there, but if you do buy the same cord that I'm using, there's a good chance that it's going to work for the pattern that I'm doing. So that's one option, but I totally get if you don't live in the United States, for one, or if you have cord on hand that you want to use, so I get why you wouldn't necessarily want to use the cord I have listed, but if you are a beginner and you have access to that and want to use it, it will make things a little more simple. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Another thing you want to keep in mind is the cord type matters. And what I mean by that is if a pattern calls for single strand string, I have an example. So if a pattern calls for single strand macrame string, which is this one single strand stuff here, but you want to use like a 3-ply rope, even if it's the same size, these aren't going to work the same way as each other. The string is much softer than the rope. The rope is a lot firmer of a cord. If you took it and you pinch it between your fingers, you can feel it's a lot firmer than the string. The string is really soft and you can pretty much flatten it out. The rope, you can't. It's a lot firmer. And this matters because whenever you tie a knot with the rope, the twisted 3-plied rope, it's going to use more cord per knot because you can't tighten it as much as you can the string. The soft string, you can tighten it really tight and the knot will be smaller because it's softer. It's just the way it is. So it's going to use a little bit less cord to tie a knot with the string than it will to tie a knot with the rope. And this isn't quite as big of a difference as the size of the cord being different, but that would make a big difference. You might run out of cord, or you might have way too much cord left over if you follow the pattern but you change out the type of cord. When it comes to like braided cord, if it called for rope and you replace it with braided cord, you'd get a similar issue. Braided cord is usually softer and it's stretchy a little bit too. So you can really kind of tighten the knots up more with that than you can with rope. So the most important thing, like whenever I make patterns, I usually am working with either twisted rope or single strand string. Those are my two favorites. I don't use a lot of braided cord just because I have a hard time honestly, I have a hard time cutting the lengths and keeping them perfect because it's so stretchy, and it's just a personal preference. It just takes me a long time to cut the cords, and therefore I just don't do it that often. I do like it. I like how it looks, but that's just my personal preference. I like these two specific types of cord the most, so that's usually what you'll see in my patterns. But if you were to switch them out without taking into account the stuff I was just saying about how much more cord it takes to tie a knot with the rope than the string, you might run into some problems. I recommend using the cord, the type of cord that is called for in the pattern. if you don't want to come across any issues, unless you can swap it out. You just need to know that you probably need to make your cord lengths longer if you choose to use like a 3-ply twisted rope as opposed to a single strand string, if that's what it called for. I hope that makes sense. All right, so those first two main things are the main issues that cause problems whenever people are working on macrame patterns that I've come across. I almost always get those same questions over and over and over again, so I know it is like the big thing, and it does. It makes a huge difference in if the pattern's gonna work or not. But I also wanted to mention a couple other things that can sometimes cause an issue. I don't really see this as often, but I wanted to throw it out there just, so we cover all the bases. And those two things are knot tension and spacing. Knot tension is referring to like how tight you tie your knots. So like when I work, I pull my knots snug, but I don't like pull them so tight that my hands are cramping up. And also I like to be able to untie them if I make a mistake. So I try to just tie them tight, but not too crazy tight. So if you are someone who just like pulls your knots really, really tight, or if you're someone who makes your knots really, really loose, it could affect the outcome of the pattern. You could either end up with not enough cord or too much cord. Although I really haven't seen this happen in practice, and anybody, no one has come to me and said they're having a problem and turned out to be their knots were too tight or too loose. But theoretically, I think it could affect it a little bit. So it's something to keep in mind. You just want to make your knots tight, but not like crazy tight, just tight enough. And as far as spacing, I'm referring to like the space between rows. Like sometimes in, say, a plant hanger, you'll tie a couple knots and then you'll leave like 5 inches in between and then do the next row of knots. And like if it says to leave 5 inches and you only leave 3 inches, then it's not going to work right. I mean, obviously you probably got that already. And this really isn't an issue I see people, have often. I mean, it's pretty obvious. But I want to throw it out there. It is important, like if a pattern says a certain spacing, it's probably, the cords were probably measured out based on that. So if you didn't do it that way, it might not work out the way it's supposed to. Just something to keep in mind. All right, so those are the main troubleshooting issues that I have come across in my macrame travels. And I hope that kind of clears it up a little bit and makes sense. Be sure to leave a comment if you have any questions or if you have anything to add. I'd love to hear it. And definitely be sure to check out in the description the links I put to the blog post that goes along with this video that kind of explains things in a written format. And there's also that chart I mentioned. And also be sure to check on the link to my macrame cord size calculator because it is really, really helpful for changing lengths or changing cord size on your projects. And I use it all the time. I really do. And it's super handy. So definitely check that out. I'll put that down below. If you enjoyed this video and if this was helpful for you, please be sure to leave a like. It really helps me out with the algorithm. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. Thanks so much for watching and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.